Good afternoon, good evening, good day. Thank you for joining me. To anyone who may come across this video and watch it, I hope that you take something valuable from it, from the information that I'm going to be talking about here today. So in this video, we're going to talk about the goal of it first. The goal of this video is to give you insight into how the world works. While the economy has predictable ups and downs, monetary policy, and money creation, it's purely educational. These are my views and my opinions, thoughts, and how I see the world. All right, with that being said, let's talk about the beast system. That language, the beast, is used a lot in Christianity. The book of Revelation talks about a beast that shall rise from the ocean, a beast that shall rise from the pit, the mark of the beast, 666. This isn't a religious video. Rather, I'm using the language from that book in order to put an idea together. The beast system. Why am I using this language? Because you can either be consumed by it or you can utilize it. To go back to the Bible, the consumed part is a passage where it says, no man will be able to buy, sell, or trade without having the mark of the beast. We're already in the beast system. The monetary market system, particularly the dollar system as the world reserve currency. We're going to talk about the evolution of this system from electronic money to digital monetary systems, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. I outlined it in 3 sections. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913, Pax Americana, or America's being the world's dominant superpower for the last few decades, all of my lifetime, most of the world's current timeline, and one world currency, or the evolution of the monetary system. I'm going to highlight Bitcoin and talk briefly about the great financial crash of 2007 and 2008, though I didn't write too much of that down. So let's start at the Federal Reserve Act. Okay, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. I looked all this, I searched this on the internet. I used ChatGPT and Grok to help me do this. Signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23rd, 1913. Created a decentralized system with 12 regional banks, a central board of governors, and the purpose of this was to improve banking supervision and provide an elastic currency, make the monetary system stable. At least that's how it appears on the outside. Key features of that system is modern monetary mechanics and fractional reserve lending. Fractional reserve lending. At its core, this system is about banks turning a little bit of money into real money. How do they do that? Well, they do it by fractional reserve lending. So let's outline some of the key features of this system. Right, it creates new money. It's a growth system via depositing and lending. Banks and financial institutions, but banks, they lend depositors' funds out. They keep 10% reserve for withdrawals and just to have enough money on hand. And the other 90%, well, what do they do with that? They lend it out, because banks, that's how they make money, through lending and charging interest. Now that money in turn gets deposited into another bank account, which the cycle starts over again. They keep a portion of it, 10%, let's say, and the remaining 90%, what do? They lend it out. What happens after that? Well, it gets deposited into another bank account. You see where this is going. And this isn't new, by the way. My first encounter with it was the Zeitgeist addendum. Breaks this down in a lot more detail, but says a lot of the same stuff. Let me give you another example. So the Federal Reserve, the United States, and the Treasury, they utilize this. Or let's say the U.S. government needs money. The folks at the Treasury will work with them, and the Treasury will issue U.S. debt securities, Treasury bonds, T-bills, fixed income earning instruments, and the Federal Reserve will buy those debt securities, put them on their balance sheet, and the Federal Reserve, the bank, will then in turn put a check in the U.S. government's bank account, or they'll lend that money out to commercial banks for those commercial banks then to lend that money out, all with interest, by the way. Everybody's paying interest. That's the part of this too, interest being charged. And then that money gets injected into the economy and it goes to work. We spend it. Business owners, they utilize it to fuel their business. Fractional reserve lending, modern monetary mechanics, and the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Part 1. Just to give y'all a view of it. It's 3 parts. The next part, Pax Americana. Well, America's superpower reigned since 1940s and so on, after World War II. As we got the crash of 29 is within this timeline, because I mentioned 1913 and the crash of 29, the Great Depression. The crash of 29 was a result of this system. What's designed into it is it has boom and bust periods, like they're predictable. What it says here on Grok, flexible for booms and busts. The Fed can flood the system with money during slumps, recessions to prevent freeze-ups, or pull back to cool overheating, raising and lowering interest rates. The crash of 29 was one of these bust periods. Pax Americana Part 2. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the petrodollar, the Nixon shock. Let's take a journey back in time via my notes. The U.S. was one of the allies. Some of the allies were the U.S., France, and Britain. They were the allies versus the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, or Italy. And let's not leave the USSR out for the allies, because they were part of the allies at that time. So the allies and the Axis powers. So the America, out of all the allies, they were the best positions to divvy out the spoils of war. This leads me to the Potsdam Agreement. Germany got divided up. Think of the Berlin Wall. It greenlit the A-bomb, or the Manhattan Project. I can't remember what year, but it's on the timeline. Greenlit the A-bomb. Laid the groundwork for the UN, the United Nations. The big 5 of those were the US, United States, the United Kingdom, UK, the USSR, the United Soviet Satellite Republics, France, the UN. Within this big club of United Nations, the US was big dog. They had the megaphone. All right, so after the war, America was in a good position. A lot of countries owed debt to the U.S. As the U.S. Fronted massive cash via Lend-Lease, the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, 50 billion dollars in gear to 30 plus allies. Debt owed by other countries gave the United States geopolitical economic dominance, particularly in Europe. Coming back to how Europe, or how the U.S. left their flagpoles in Europe after World War II and going into the Cold War. The Treaty of San Francisco, 1951. It formally ended the war in Japan. It demilitarized Japan. The U.S. set up a foothold in the Pacific as well. We can see that foothold to this day. Paris Peace Treaties, 1947. Italy, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Finland suffered territorial losses, had to pay war reparations with limits put on their militaries. This effectively neutered the Axis powers and what was left over from them, and it redrew the borders in Allies' favor, coming back to those footholds that America had in Western Europe, or in Europe and in the Pacific. So America had an advantage, and that was being on the other side of the earth when it came to both world wars, because they were both fought in Europe. So that meant America's infrastructure was held intact, which enabled them to produce arms and provide aid to the Allies, going back to those loans and the Lend-Lease Act. No homeland fighting kept infrastructure intact. Post-war, the United States held massive gold reserves. So the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was something else that was born out of World War II. I didn't put the year down. But the Bretton Woods Agreement pegged the dollar to gold, and currencies pegged their currency to the U.S. So you see how the United States was in a position of power via their currency being used as a medium or a peg to stabilize other countries' currencies. But all that came to an end. This was key in securing the dollar as the world reserve currency. So in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended dollar gold convertibility. Why did that happen? So the United States spent too much money, printed too many dollars, and didn't have enough gold to pay these dollars back when people wanted to cash it in for their gold, because they didn't have the gold. They leveraged the assets and overprinted money till it came to a breaking point. So President Nixon ended in a very diplomatic way, got on the television, and he said, you can't do that anymore. You got dollars? Well, you can't trade them in for gold. Sorry. Well, he said it in a much more suitable fashion for television and geopolitics. Entered the fiat currency system, which the fiat system can be understood as money by government decree. It's backed by the full faith of the United States government. So it's a trust agreement. It put currencies around the world in a float state. They weren't pegged to something where it would, in times of economic crisis, it would be able to withstand the shock. It being pegged to gold versus it not being pegged to a stable asset. We're in 1971. I'm going to skip to 1974 and talk about the oil embargo. So what does this have to do with the United States and the dollar being the world reserve currency, and this connecting to the idea of the beast system? Well, the oil producing nations in the Middle East, think of Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. I don't know them well off the top of my head. Those are just some I can think of. They cut the supply of oil off because of, I have it written down here, I'm looking for it. The United States' alliance to Israel, how the United States was backing Israel during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israel-Palestine War, and Egypt got involved at some point. But the Arab nations, the oil producing nations, OPEC, they weren't happy about that, so they cut the flow of oil off. This drove energy prices up throughout the world, and it really added more stress to the United States economic engine. So what did the U.S. do? Enter the petrodollar. The petrodollar agreement. Well, Henry Kissinger, he was the deal maker. The petrodollar agreement can easily be understood as oil exclusively priced in U.S. dollars in exchange for U.S. military aid and U.S. resources. And what they would do, they would take profits from the oil money and they would recycle those profits back into U.S. treasuries. See where I'm going with this, right? Back into U.S. treasuries. And that feedback, which enabled that feedback loop of money creation to continue for as long as they want, which kept America, was instrumental in keeping America as the dominant superpower of the world. Having the world reserve currency tied into that really solidified America's place in the world from that period in time up until now. And it's being tested, as we can see. The U.S. it gave the U.S. sanctioning power like they were cracking a whip. Like, do something that the U.S. didn't want. Sanctions. Have some friends that the U.S. didn't want. Sanctions. That led to the creation of the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Okay, the Nixon shock, the dollar being pegged to, oil being exclusively traded in dollars. Some of the consequences from the Nixon shock were, with the dollar being depegged, were it devalued the dollar, it drove up inflation because it made the dollar cheaper because they could print endless amounts of money. Made importers such as the U.S. need more money in order to import. So the Bretton Woods agreement that ended, the petrodollar agreement, fiat system, what we're living in now, the beast system. America's been spending recklessly for so long that it was severely over leveraged. So the system is going to have to evolve in order to keep up with the demand or to keep the system intact. So it's got to evolve, which leads to the third and final point, which I wrote as one world currency, or a system in which we're all connected through, and there'll be universal currencies. We think of, and this makes me think of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology. I mean, it's getting more and more popular, and more recognized as of late. And I said I wanted to talk about the great financial crash. So to sum it up, the great financial crash, mortgage-backed securities, where they went to poop. And this led to a lot of banks going under. And once one domino started to fall, the rest of the dominoes started to fall. And this began to trip up the monetary engine that drives the world. Because once these major banks started to fail, it started to ripple out and happen in other financial and economic centers of the earth. The system got tested, and it's all a result. It can all be tied back to money being able to be printed out of thin air. Then all that invisible money would falls under from under itself. And that's how all three of those things are tied together. That is the system that we are in, and that's what it's progressing to because of things that have happened in the past and how decisions that our leaders have made have played out and how they've been continued to play out and get worse as far as the economic side of it. But I want to end it with this. You can, no one, I hope you understand now how it works, how money comes into existence. But so what do we do with that? How do you use it? Because I said you could either be consumed by it or you can utilize it. So, well, how do you use it? Well, instead of spending, and this isn't financial advice, but this is, I invest it. I invest in the infrastructure of this system. Like, I'm not going to be consumed by the beast system. I'm going to utilize it if I can buy parts of it, or because if I'm positioned in parts of it that are going to grow, then the consumer side that I take part in, it'll cancel that out. And at some point, it'll outgrow it to where I have my own ecosystem, monetary and economic stability, to where I don't have to participate in the parts of the system that take the most out of you, like a 9-to-5 job or things like that. I could go on and on, but I'm not, because I'm running up on 30 minutes. And I want to bring this video to a conclusion. Where do we go from here? All right, this is my first time doing a video. And before I did it, I sat and thought to myself, what's my goal here? Like, what do I want to come out of this? Well, I want to educate people. I want to educate anybody who will listen. And I want to learn more too. It is my desire to grow and learn from what you have to say. And what I have to say to you, it's purpose of it is to lift you up and to educate you so that you know how to make moves. We know how to protect ourselves. We know how to protect our families in these trying times, because the school of life is going to throw curveballs at you. That's part of the coursework. The information is out there for us now to utilize so we can take part in this, so we can get our money up, build up generational wealth. And that's my goal here. My goal for myself, goal for my fellow human beings. And there'll be more videos to come and keep the momentum rolling. But I wanted to start with this first. I thank y'all. Y'all have a good night. Your time was greatly appreciated.